Hey everybody, it's Brad with the Big Family Homestead, and today I have a very special treat for you indeed. I am here with author and rock star Tyler Woods. He has written a book that I have fallen in love with called 11th Hour Preparedness, Making Choices While We Can. How are you today, Tyler?
Hello. Hi, glad to be with you.
Yeah, so you have been a part of a lot of our live shows lately in that people are starting to recognize you, and I've been talking about your book because honestly, I'm a fan of the way that the book is written, and I want to talk about that. But before we do, why don't you tell the folks a little bit about who you are, and let's get into why did you write this book. But first of all, who the heck is Tyler Woods, and why should I listen to this guy?
Well, I guess credibility starts with getting published. No, that's actually, there's a whole lot of people that follow that, actually. You got to look into why does somebody have something to say? Just writing a book doesn't do it. But the book actually got started. I was a preparedness focal for the Boeing Company because I was into preparedness many years before that. And I worked with the Boeing Company for about 17 and a half years, and they needed somebody to do preparedness, looking at 72-hour kits and earthquake preparedness and that sort of thing. And I was sent out from the company on payroll to go to high schools, libraries, civic centers, talk to people about preparedness, and then work with preparedness plans for evacuation plans and things for the complexes. I wrote the evacuation plan for the Bellevue Eastgate complex and the Auburn Manufacturing Center evacuation plan, and I believe they're still in use today. So I got a little bit of credentials there. I was with the Boeing Company. I was a systems analyst. I was trained in critical thinking, systems analysis, and team building. And so those were very useful in preparedness thinking. And then my experience, man, I think my life has been one big disaster because there's one disaster after another.
A never-ending disaster, huh?
Yes, a never-ending disaster. Even when I was just really young, I was in the 5th grade and standing at the table filling out a milk ticket. Remember those? You might have a couple extra circles around the sun than I do, but I don't know milk. This was back when a little half pint of milk was 3 cents.
Wow.
And 5 cents if it was chocolate. And anyway, I was filling out a milk ticket, and Mrs. Taylor, a neighbor of a friend of mine's mom, was the lady who was the lunch lady, and she had just come in and scolded all of us for writing poorly on those milk tickets. So he said, "Write your name clearly so I can see what they are." And I was there filling out that milk ticket as the table started dancing and the ceiling tiles started falling and the big Anchorage earthquake had happened, and it had felt all the way down to the Puget Sound area. And we had a rumble. It was a pretty good rumble. And all that time, the one thing in my mind was, Mrs. Taylor's going to be really mad at me for this.
Oh my gracious. Yeah, that's kind of I think that's a good plausible reason not to have good writing on the milk ticket. There was literally an earthquake. I promise you.
I had a buy on that one.
Yeah, no kidding.
Yes, even at that same time of my life, we had a tail end of a hurricane that hit the Puget Sound area. Now that was collateral damage. We had 4 days with no power, and my dad taught me a lot about preparedness. We were cooking our dinners and meals in the fireplace. We were, and it was an adventure. It wasn't surviving. It was camping in the living room, and I had a great time. And my dad always made it look, it may be rough, but we'll make the best of it and have a good time at it. And we were always people who were prepared.
Well, I think, too, that, when you're a kid, the perspective is a whole lot different than mom and dad who were probably feeling that stress and didn't want to put any of that stress on you.
Right. Absolutely.
So, okay.
Well, from that time, it was sort of the mindset that never left me.
Right.
Always ready, no matter what it is, have a plan. And if you don't have electricity, have a means to keep your house warm. If you don't have telephone, have a means to get communication. And if you can't get to the grocery store, or if the grocery store is empty, I watched that time and time again. I went to Bible college in Pennsylvania and saw every time we had a snowstorm, the shelves would go empty.
Yeah.
And come on, snowstorm in Pennsylvania, this is normal. But it was also normal. Those shelves would go empty within hours of a snowstorm. So I learned that, you better buy ahead and not be dependent on that next grocery trip. Amen. So it also came together to be a preparedness mindset.
Okay. So just a brief recap. A lot of actual corporate real world experience, years and years of that. And but there's something that we haven't touched on that I really think is important to point out, because it says a lot about the book, and it says a lot about who you are, that not a lot of people who have gone through Bible college and become clergy are very preparedness-minded people. A lot of them go with the more spiritual side, and I don't even think it's fair to say more spiritual side, but they tend to super spiritualize things like God will just make it okay, instead of having practical knowledge. And I want few people to know your background in the church.
Okay, well, I've been a pastor ordained since 1979. Only recently have not pastored a church, and we're going back to Washington for a very different kind of ministry, and to be closer to the grandkids. So we're heading back there. But many people, like you say, believe it's spiritual to I'll just trust God, and that's nice to say, but I believe Joseph trusted God, and God told him to store up during the years of plenty to cover the lean years. And I want to be a Joseph. I'd rather be a Joseph than his brothers that came begging.
No kidding.
I want to be one to give to my neighbors, not be in a desperate situation.
Amen. And Joseph is he's my go-to example, especially when you're talking to, sometimes you'll get in a conversation with somebody who's a believer and they just will be baffled. Why would you have a year worth of food at your house? That's crazy. And then if you use an example like Joseph, they don't really have much to say, because it's clear that without Joseph's faithfulness to God, that Israel would have been in seriously bad trouble. And,
absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. And so he's not going to leave his people be, left out on their own. And he used Joseph, even through all that hardship, to basically save Israel.
Well, Joseph the prepper was God's plan to save Israel.
Amen.
So how can you say that being a prepper is not a godly thing? You are putting yourself in a position to be the helper. And that's what God wants us to be, is to be the helper.
Absolutely. And, I think a lot of times people forget that, just because we're believers, God's also given you one of these. He's given you practical skills that we absolutely use in every other aspect of our life. But then when it comes to stuff like preparedness, it's like we switch our brain off, and it's like, for some reason, we just freewheel. And that's always baffled me.
Yeah, it's not an exact quote, but there is a quote in Scripture. There is a scripture that says, a wise man seeth the trouble coming and either gets out of the way or prepares himself. I forget what it actually says, but basically, keep your head up and look and see what's going on, and be prepared for trouble that's coming. I have a motto that I live by, and it says the best place to be when trouble breaks out is somewhere else. But the same thing goes with the best place to be when there's no food in the grocery store is to have a full pantry.
Or have your own grocery store at your house.
Absolutely.
Okay, so let's talk about the book for just a few minutes. I want to know what prompted you specifically to write the book, because I've got some opinions on it that I want to share with you and see what your thoughts are. But what made you sit down and go, you know what, I'm going to write a book, and I'm going to write a book on preparedness?
Well, like I said, I was the preparedness vocal for the Boeing Company. I was representing FEMA. Or FEMA supported me. They gave me all kinds of materials, great videos. FEMA does have a lot of good stuff on preparedness. I don't throw them out with the bathwater. They do have some resource there. But at that, just as I was moving toward or making the move to come to Texas, FEMA stepped up and said, well, thank you, Mr. Woods, we appreciate all your work, and we're going to take over from now and do that work. Thanks a lot, and I didn't even get a certificate. I didn't do it for the certificate or anything, but it kind of let me go free because I no longer was on the hook, and the Boeing company didn't need me to do that anymore because FEMA's going to do it.
Yay.
Well, 3 years later, I get a call from some of my buds at Boeing saying, do you still have your notes? Because FEMA took over, but they never filled the shoes, and they haven't done a thing since, and we're flat-footed. And if you've got your notes, we could sure use them.
And I'll be happy to send those on down when the check clears.
Yeah, right. No, they were good friends, and they were volunteer positions. So, I really did. I looked over my notes, and they were rather dated, and I did what's called a threat analysis. Now, that sounds all tactical and military, but it's not. You do that when you buy a home. One of the threats are a fire could burn down your house, and your threat analysis says, okay, my threats are fire, flood, maybe you're in an earthquake area, maybe you're in a hurricane area or tornado alley or something of that sort. And then you come up with a plan to mitigate those threats. And that could be fire extinguishers, fire smoke detectors, and fire insurance. That's how you handle that threat. You get flood insurance. You get tornado coverage. I don't know how that works. I've never lived in Tornado Alley, but you can get windstorm coverage down here in Texas for hurricanes. And you do things to prepare. If you're in a forest fire area, you clear the fuel from around your house in a large, wide berth to give yourself a buffer, plus you have fire insurance. It's looking at the threats critically and analyzing what you can do to mitigate their damage to you.
It's kind of, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Well, when I did the review of what are the new threats, within those few years, we now had come to the point where our power grid is now a serious threat, because it used to be the power grid had a 30% margin. We could manufacture 30% more and transmit or send that power out over the transmission lines. We had a capacity to go 30% more than what we're using. And right now we're in the Texas grid, which is one of the nation's best, most robust power grid, and we're operating at an 85% of capacity.
Oh,
that means only, 15%.
And they're adding homes every year.
Anything.
And homes keep getting built and businesses keep getting built. The demand is not going away.
Absolutely. And, at the same time when we needed more power, there was a ban on coal-fired power plants at a time we needed the most, with no alternative, no place to go. They were just cut off, and so that cut back a lot of our auxiliary power. We couldn't even keep them on standby; they were just shut down. And this was going on all over the nation. We were just doing mindless things with no thought to the consequences. And so now we have roving blackouts. Never had those growing up. If anybody in the entire country had a blackout, it was national news. Now it's regular events, roving blackouts, and if a grid goes down or a localized grid goes down, they're just down until they can get it back up, because the other grids around them don't have the capacity to loan power and to transmit it over. So the grid going down is a serious issue. And now people are looking quite heavily at, I need some alternative power. And so that's a new one. And terrorism is a real thing. Terrorism on the electric grid or terrorism on everything else. It's a real issue. You got to look at it. It doesn't mean that you're living in an area where terrorism is going to affect you greatly, But terrorism could affect the national transportation system, which is what gets your groceries to your grocery store.
Yeah.
And terrorism could affect the water treatment plant that you get your water from. All kinds of things. And you've got to have an answer to deal with that. So
now here's the thing that's kind of sticking out in my head is the overarching I guess the size of preparedness is probably intimidating for a lot of people because it affects so many areas of our life. The weather, food, your shelter, electricity, security, all of these things, they seep into every aspect of our lives. How do you manage that and not drive yourself nuts?
Okay, that was the key of what I wanted to address in the book. The book started because I did the threat analysis and realized, we're not going to work. This isn't going to work on my laser printer. I needed something bigger than that because I had already passed 230,000 words, which was the first edition, and it was a very small book. It is what I sent up to Boeing, but it was basically my speaker notes for conferences or mini seminars and things that were held in the local communities, and it paid for itself in 3 months after print.
Wow!
So it sold like hotcakes. I wasn't expecting it to sell. I expected it to be available for the notes at the conferences and to help out the Boeing company. But after that, I think what they did was they got a copy and they translated it into their own print, which is fine. There wasn't any, I wasn't looking for royalties or anything. I just was doing it. Give it to them as a service, and thank you very much. And then it took off on that. Well, there were so many comments and questions, and they wanted more and more and more. So that's where the second edition came in that you have a copy of. And that is greatly expanded and has a large section in the back of actually how-to, which goes into exactly how do you make this? How do you make my own yeast? I can't buy it in the store. Well, how do I culture and develop my own sourdough yeast to make bread? And how do I grind flour? How do I make an outhouse that's not going to a torpedo bucket? There you go.
I want to make a torpedo bucket. Oh. There's wells around here all over the place, and it never even occurred to me that if the power goes down, I mean, we have some solar backup and we've got generators and such, but not everybody around here is going to have that. I don't want to lose sight of what the question is, but we'll come back to the torpedo bucket later. But continue on about how do you encapsulate all this without going nuts? You've compiled it in a very concise, easy, readable way.
Well, I put it into 4 categories. I figured I needed some sort of a gimmick line to put to contain it, and I call it the 4 Fs. Kind of a play on the military 4F.
Right.
The 4 Fs are food and water first. Water is more important than food, but it doesn't start with an F, so I had to go food and water. But those two are your first concern is food and water, because you just can't. We're going to assume that you've got air to breathe, and the very next thing is water, and the very next thing is food. You need those to stay alive and to keep on going. And then after that, you need first aid. You need, and the next orders don't quite work. Don't really matter so much. They're all sort of equally important. But you need first aid, your medicines, whatever you need to stay healthy. Vitamins, because maybe your food isn't going to be the most nutritious, healthy food that you can do, but it'll keep you going. You can add the vitamins to that to kind of buffer it a little bit and make it a little more healthy, keep you from getting sick, because getting sick is a very, very bad thing when the infrastructure is down. You may be a distance away from a doctor. And then fuel, which covers everything from wood in the wood stove to batteries in your flashlight, all sorts of power, gas for the generator, all kinds of things about fuel. And we talk about the different types of fuel and ways to stabilize it and ways to store it. And it kind of teaches you a little bit about fuel and the importance of it. During Harvey, we're right here in Aransas Pass right now, which is a bicycle ride from where the eye of Harvey came in. And I tell you what, when I stepped out on my front porch and saw a laser dot on my chest saying, "From Harvey with love, we're coming," we got out of here. I got Terry out of here, my wife, and I took her up to her brother's up in Killeen, Texas, or Harker Heights, actually, but it's up there near Fort Hood. And then that was Friday afternoon. Harvey hit Friday late afternoon, so it was on our heels. When we left, it was 150 some miles before we found the first open gas station that was, had somebody behind the cashier thing. Mm-hmm. We were one of the last out. And I came back almost the next morning. Friday late, we were here. I came back early Sunday morning. So we were gone. I was gone just about 24 hours. So I was back here right after Harvey. And during that time, it's just short of martial law. Everybody knows communication is down and looting happens rampant after those storms. So they encouraged everybody to be armed. And just about everybody was, and there was very little looting. When everybody's armed, everybody's polite, and that worked like a champ. Well, I had my everyday carry sidearm, and I had my everyday carry flashlight. Mm-hmm. I drew my flashlight countless numbers of times. I never had to draw my sidearm once. So batteries and a good flashlight were way more important than my sidearm. Now, if I'd have needed a sidearm, it would have become seriously important. But you see what I'm saying?
I sure do.
We tend to put our emphasis on the wrong things when it comes to preparedness. We need to think it through. And what's the reality? We buy fire insurance and smoke detectors, and we get irritated when they go off and tell us that dinner's ready. But in the end, we're hoping to never need them. And we're hoping that every dollar we spend in fire insurance is a waste. And it should be the same thing with a sidearm or firearms. We need them, but boy, don't go out like Rambo. It's just not
Let me ask you a question, because being the unique pastor that is pro-gun, pro-Second Amendment, how do you reconcile those things? Because once again, you've got a lot of people on the church side of things that would say, well, God's going to take care of me. Why would you even want one of those things around? That's an unnecessary risk. You're just inviting trouble. How would you reconcile those things?
In my church, I actually did not carry when I was preaching and pastoring. It just was heavy. It was in my way. So I didn't. And someone asked right after in a church, a man came forward during the invitation and shot the pastor right in front of the church. Oh and God. This happened. Yeah, this happened. It was national news. I forget where. It was a Baptist church somewhere. And they had the video of it and everything. It was awful. And somebody asked me that says, well, what would you do if you had an active shooter that came into your church? And I said, well, first thing I'd do is check his pulse, because it wouldn't be there for long. He says, what do you mean? You carry a gun? I said, no. I said, but about 30% of our congregation does, and I'm even counting the little old ladies, and they're good shots. Well, I understand that we try to help, and we want to be a ministering spirit and share the gospel with every creature. But if that person is beyond that motivation, and what they want to do is cause mayhem and harm and take my life, well, I have a responsibility to my family and to the others that I might be able to reach by staying alive. And if one person comes in with the purpose and motivation of killing someone, me or anyone, well, I'm going to introduce him to Jesus personally, instantly.
There you go. Okay,
And I'm sorry, but I can't control that. But I can stay alive so that I can help as many as I can.
Right. And I'm with you on that, because I think a lot of people, they mischaracterize certain scriptures when Jesus talks about turning the other cheek. It was not intended the way that a lot of people just have this go ahead and abuse me mentality. I'll just get shellacked. That is not what that scripture was talking about. And a lot of people, I think, misunderstand that we're not called to be doormats as Christians.
Well, that's because we are letting people with no godliness make the interpretation for us, and to tell us what we should think and how we should act based on what they don't know about the scriptures.
Oh man, this interview could go. We better get refocus, because I could go down that rabbit trail for days.
Road a long ways.
All right, so let's talk about practical preparedness. Now, one thing that I like about this book is you are not on a mission to educate everybody about absolutely every single thing about how to treat water. But there's enough information for you to go, okay, these are great, good start, practical information, good stuff, but you're not trying to give a college class on just water purification.
No. You can go search that and research that all you want. And it all depends on where you are. If you are up in the mountains and you've got a glacial stream coming right down in your backyard, you really don't need a reverse osmosis water filter system or turkey filter system or, any of that. I live here in South Texas. I had a generator that powered my well. I didn't need to use that bullet bucket to get water out. I didn't have to worry about the purity of it. It's just as pure as it was the year before. It's just, as long as you don't get flood water over your well cap, your water's good. If you do, you have to understand that your well cap could leak and you could have pollutants in your well. You need to know how to make that pure again. You need to know how to clean your well and get it ready to serve your family again. And you need to know that most of the advertisements are false. You actually need, they say you need a gallon of water a day per person. You need 3 gallons of water a day per person. And that's for a very minimal level of drinking water, cooking water, washing water, and laundry water.
Hygiene.
You need 3 gallons a day. So that adds up kind of quick.
Yeah, well, and that's just one topic out of many, many topics in your book. And what I like about it is you give enough information where somebody can get their teeth into it and go, these are practical things I can do, but it's not so exhaustive that you just get bogged down and I don't want to talk about this one specific thing anymore. I want to get on to something else because there's so much to prepare for.
There is, but at the same time, I break it down into good, better, and best.
Yeah.
Whatever your situation is, someone can paint you a picture of the perfect situation of a isolated cabin up in the hills and the mountain where you've got game and rivers of fresh water and you're way away from any harm, and the winds of the ocean are coming in and you don't have any possibility of contamination unless it's Fukushima and all of these things. And then you say, wow, I'm so far away from that, I don't have any hope. Well, great. That's a great thing to think about. But how about taking whatever situation you're in and improving it a little bit? Whatever you do makes it better or good. Gets me to a gooder place, if you will, a place that is good, as opposed to maybe I've got some things that aren't good that I need to fix. And then from wherever position that is, there's always opportunity to make it better. So you can move the next step, which is better. And eventually you can hope to get to that place that's best. But it's like preparedness, the 72-hour kits and that lead you to more preparedness where you're good for a year or 3 years, and then you move on towards homesteading, where you've got a perpetual preparedness and you're constantly providing your own self-sufficiency as best you can. None of us are self-sufficient. We called ourselves an independent church, and yet that was a real fail of a name. I understand what they meant by it, but what it should mean is we're totally dependent on the Word of God and Jesus Christ, not dependent on an organization or something of that sort. But it ought to be totally dependent, not independent. Well, the same thing of self-sufficient is really totally dependent on God's provision,
sure,
but not tied into an earthly system that could fail us.
Yeah. So I got a couple more questions now. If you are looking at the landscape of social, what's going on in the world with social stuff and politics, and what if you had to just go, what, the most likely thing that could cause a problem that would disrupt our way of life? I'm hoping we're not going to go to crazy Nibiru, the space planet. It's going to come down and burn everybody up. But what would your opinion be on likely possibilities of disruption?
I think it's actually a couple, and it could happen in any number of ways. We could have an economic collapse. As quickly as a change of government and the economy starts heading down in a nosedive, we don't have a whole lot of margin left. We could end up having a worldwide depression, which we just narrowly avoided the last time, this last decade. That could happen, and it could destroy our economy. And that would put us in a position that could be untenable. The other would be there are some crazy nations out there that are just going berserk, and they're getting their hands on some very powerful weapons that they're small potatoes. They really don't have a whole lot to lose. They could just say, why not, and take a shot at us. As simply, it doesn't take a lot of high tech. It's actually the plausible storyline in the two novels that I wrote. I really don't like broadcasting the plan because it could happen. But if someone were to launch a nuclear device on an intermediate range missile from an offshore cargo ship, which is all very, very possible, all it would have to do would be to go 100 miles up or 150 miles up over any of the 10 Midwestern states. I mean, you could hit that with iron sights. You don't need GPS for that. And have that thing go off. It would black out every communication and control satellite that we have. It wouldn't knock a leaf off a tree on the ground. It wouldn't expose the old-fashioned film in your camera, but it would sure knock out all those satellites up in geosynchronous orbit. The ones that were in a low Earth orbit that were on the other side of the Earth, they would come around, but they have a big hole in that too. And we would lose the internet. We would lose telephone communications. We would lose a system called SCADA. Some call it SCADA. It's statistical control and data analysis of how remote power plants and dams and sites of this sort are controlled from a central processing center. And we would lose all of that communication. Their default mode is to shut down. And that includes high tension line transfer of power. And basically, we would have a nationwide grid shutdown. And Dr. Stansbury, he's been, his credentials go deep. But he is now in a counseling role to Congress and is urging them to get these EMP-proof transformers that take a year to build, a year to get. And we need hundreds of them. So, I mean, we're way behind on the curve. And he said, if we lose the power grid, it will take at least 3 years to restore it. And that's kind of scary because he said our power plants are not built to do what's called a cold start. They have to have power out there to match phase 2, or they can't come up in power. So he said, in order to circumvent all that and get these plants up and restore power to the country, it would take 3 years. Then they did further analysis of the cause or the results of not having power for 3 years, and the death rate from that was phenomenal. And they modified that and said, they came back and said it's actually 7 years, if at all. And we're talking about something of a death rate in our country that would exceed anything that would unnerve you like a D-Day. Would seem like a walk in the park. This would be nationwide. Tens of millions of people would be dead as a result of having no electricity. You think about it in the wintertime, how many people depend on electricity? In the summertime, how many people depend on air conditioning?
Food's not getting to stores.
Yeah, walk through your grocery store. There's not a thing in your grocery store that didn't have to travel 100 miles to get there and come by computer. And I had somebody counter and says, oh, yeah, the bread is baked locally. I said, yeah, but the yeast and the flour that went to that local bakery came from hundreds of miles away. So it's all
interconnected.
We would shut down without trucking and interstate transport. And you have no idea. I'm down here where refineries are, and I've worked with the refineries. And I'll tell you what, they need a ton of electricity to refine oil and to produce your gasoline and diesel. And that isn't happening if you've lost the grid.
Whoa.
So it's bad. I mean, that kind of stuff could be it would set us back to the 18th century.
That is definitely food for thought. And I've got some questions.
Reality things. Those are real touchable things that can happen.
Right. And it's like, this is one of those subjects where I feel like it's an uncomfortable place that you have to encounter. You just have to deal with it. It's something that you don't really, it's not going to give you the warm fuzzies. It's not going to make you go, man, I just feel great about life right now. But it's a reality that if you want to be able to protect your family or, have some degree of life and some degree of security, some degree of peace in your day-to-day life, the more you know, the more you can prepare for, the less you're going to fear.
Sure. Well, that gets to my fifth F. And I put a fifth F in there, and the fifth F is faith. And Brad, my security comes from the cross and my relationship with Christ.
Amen.
And this world is not my home. I'm just this is a temporary thing until I get to my heavenly home. And I'm going to begin eternity the moment I die. So I'm already seated together in heavenly places, Paul says.
Amen.
So I'm just waiting for my body to catch up.
Amen.
But in all of that, why do I really care to prepare so that I can breathe air and burn food? I mean, really? Well, the only reason is I've got the message that can help those who might at that point be ready to listen. And as far as anything else going crazy, I already have my security. And if me and my family are taken out of the equation, there will be a pile of food there that might help somebody else. But I hope they read my Bible, and especially the notes.
Yeah, leave a note for them. Hey, to the person that's eating this food, that now that I'm gone, there you go. It's like with the president's letters, that when they leave the one for their the ones succeeding them. Yeah. Okay, I've got a couple questions from some of our subscribers, and then after that, I've got one final question. But the first one you've already answered. It came from Drew B. when he asked about what your background is. So I just wanted to make mention that Drew B. asked that question, and you answered it earlier.
But I have experienced storms, quakes, floods, hurricanes, a superclass typhoon. Those are the things that I've actually experienced. And then my training in the Boeing company and my military experience and training there. It stacks up pretty thick.
Yeah. All right. So a channel called Little Homestead in Alabama. What would be your top 5 pantry items to start with? I
would start with top two, and that's beans and rice. That's it.
Well, you got to give me some more than that. You can't just be like, there it is. Tell me why.
Here's the wisdom behind that. You have beans and rice that are going to feed you and your family for 6 months. It's cheap, it's easy to store, and it will keep you alive. Well, it'll do something else. Every time you look over there at that big pile of beans and rice, you're going to be thinking, if I don't do something more, that's all I'm going to eat.
Oh, man.
You will have motivation to store canned sardines and start learning about Thrive and the food that you could have that would actually taste good.
So the big question. So the big question is, how many days of beans and rice before you actually you're ready to go meet Jesus? I'm like, I'm done. I don't care.
I would be ready to meet Jesus about day 2 if that's all I had.
Yeah, it will sustain life, but it will not be fun.
That's right. It'll sustain life at a low level.
Okay, so then what would be the other 3 items you would add after beans and rice?
I would. You'd look at how your budget is. If you could afford to get started in Thrive, that's where I would go, because those are long-term dehydrated good foods. I have. There are some other companies that do it as well. I've got one that I use that has a powdered whey product that's basically a powdered milk that lasts forever. And we've used that, and we've become some chocolate because my wife doesn't drink anything that isn't chocolate. Oh. She's looking for a chocolate cow or a chocolate goat, but she hasn't found one yet. So, and you got to remember, guys, chocolate may be an option for you, but it's a major food group for our wives.
Oh, amen.
So, when things are frustrated, stand back and throw chocolate. You'll win.
You know what's funny about the chocolate thing? A long time ago, at least 2 years ago, I had made a video on survival chocolate. And it was tongue-in-cheek. When the zombies come, then, blah, 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 you'll be set because you got your survival chocolate. But the reality is food fatigue is a reality. And Absolutely. If you don't have those little rays of sunshine, like, oh, I got a bag of Skittles hidden away, or I got a this or a that, you're really going to be an unhappy camper.
Yeah, you will. Life gets pretty dull when it's just beans and rice.
Amen.
And we haven't even talked about the seasonings for that beans and rice. A lot of preppers, they store all the basics, but they don't store the seasoning. And have you ever had boiled beans with no seasoning in it? No dried onions, no garlic, no salt. You need lots of salt.
Oh, man. I can't even imagine. I'll tell you what, we actually, personally, our family scored a humongous, awesome God moment, thank you. When we were living in Ohio, because of the YouTube channel, some folks reached out to us, and they said that they actually had, this is the weirdest thing, they had a spice business. That they had a store that people would come and buy spices, and unfortunately for them, the business went out of business, but they gave us pounds and pounds and pounds of every spice you can ever imagine. So we quickly just canned them. We vacuum sealed them up, and I think we've got enough spice to feed the entire continent of Asia for at least a month.
Well, that's something where that it comes into, because the spices, when you buy them in small quantities, like in the grocery store, are extremely expensive. Mm-hmm. But when you go to Amazon or other places and buy them in bulk, like buy a pound of Ceylon cinnamon, and it's by the ounce, it's cheap compared to what's in the grocery store. You can buy turmeric by the pound. You can buy cream of tartar is outrageously expensive in the tiny little bottles, but it's relatively cheap when you buy it by the pound. And you say, well, what do I do with cream of tartar? Well, cream of tartar is the activating agent in baking powder that will not store, but you can buy soda and cream of tartar, and you mix it 3-to-1, and you've got baking powder. And you need to learn how to make that, because it doesn't store. There's a lot of things that don't store well that you need to learn how to make do and make go around it. And I've tried it. We've made it here many times, and it's so active and fresh. It's better than a fresh can of baking powder out of the grocery store, because even that has sat long enough, it's starting to go dead. So buying, it's not a matter of go out and buy certain things and put them on a shelf. Change our purchasing pattern so that we're buying less expensive by buying in bulk, buying larger quantities, and using it as we buy it. And it keeps making things cheaper because it cuts down on your grocery bill. And as you go, you can keep spending the same amount of money, but your pantry shelf is getting full.
Yeah, and you know what? One of the things that I don't want to go into terribly to a long extent, but you talk about how to get together with groups in the book. How to physically, where there's other people around you that are like-minded. You touch on who to make, how to vet them. You talk about even how to make sure that, you know, the crazy dude, that he's, you know, you keep him at arm's distance, but there's a lot of dynamic in there. But if you had one of those groups, you could easily go to the group and say, hey, I'm going to buy this, this, and this. Does anybody want in? And we'll split the cost and get it in bulk.
Yeah. We did that with buying 5-gallon pails, brand new HDPE2 pails with sealable lids. We bought Mylar bags and things of that sort. And because we bought them in a huge trailer load and broke them up among our large group, we met for over 5 years that way. And in the 5 years that our CQ group met, we had 10 families that either already have and are living in what you call a deep remote area of the country, everywhere from Arizona, Colorado, East Texas. Texas, I think, is its own country. It's got so many different climates. But various different places that they have moved and gotten away from the urban areas and moved out to the deep rural. And that's been 10 families, and that's about one family every 6 months.
Wow.
And we're not talking about, crazy people here. We're talking about police chiefs and nurses and people that are professionals that are doing well. So they're pretty intelligent people.
Right. Okay, so final question of this afternoon, and that is this. Okay, I'm sitting here listening to you, and I'm getting a little bit, let's say I'm the viewer watching this happen, and I'm going, okay, makes sense. How do I go about getting started? What do I do to start?
You sit down and you look and sit down with your spouse, with your family, and you play the what if games. And say, what if we lost electricity? Now there's a game you can really play, and it's walk over to the power panel and hit the main breaker and shut it off for a weekend.
Oh my gosh.
Now you'll learn real quick what you need and don't need and what doesn't work and what does. And you might determine that, you know what, we could really use a generator. But a generator is a temporary. It only, because fuel is only going to last so long. And if it were down and dirty, down hard, not coming back for years, you're going to run short of fuel to run that generator. So you're going to have to come up with alternative ways.
So sit down and just talk it out. What? Yeah. Just sit down with your spouse and go, okay, what if blah, blah, blah happened? What if blah, blah, blah happened? And then prioritize?
Yeah. Well, just pick something. Anything you do to improve your situation moves you to the good. And if you do that enough times, you're moving from good to better. And you just keep looking at it, keep active. It's not something you can do in one weekend. It's not something you can do with one, with one purchase, if you will. And that gets to another real important part in preppers. Don't think that your credit card's going to get you prepared, because the only thing you can do with a credit card is put yourself deep in debt and poorly prepared. And the most important thing you can have in preparedness is knowledge. of knowing how to do things, learning and studying. When it comes to purifying water, learn 8 different ways and practice it. Give it a, try it, work it out. I picked a bucket of water out of my pond, poured it into a clear, a great big pickle jar, and or a great big peanut butter jar, actually, back when Costco sold them in big, huge, big jars. And it looked like pickle juice. It was green. And people would think, oh, you got a pond, so you've got water to drink. Yeah, but I've fished half a dozen dead raccoons out of my pond as well. And it's because the dogs let the raccoon bait them into the water, and then they stood on the shore and didn't let the raccoon out and drowned the raccoon. I've got some pretty smart dogs. But I've pulled those dead bodies out of that pond. It's not really water I care to go drinking. And it's got suspended solids in it that make the water green. So I learned, and I found out that I could buy alum in quantity at the swimming pool supply store. And I got that and mixed it up, and you stir that in, and it was like magic. It causes all of those solids to sink to the bottom. It's called a flocking agent, and it clarified the water. And once the water was clarified, now there is not enough solids in it to frustrate the chlorine, and I can do the 16 drops per gallon rule to purify the water. But you can't purify it enough. You put so much chlorine in it, it'll be toxic to you if you leave all those suspended solids in it.
Yeah.
So it's learning, and then there's a slow sand filter. You learn how to do that, and you learn how to do get a camping filter, because for the short term you can use that. The life straws and things like that.
I actually did that one time. I went and got Swill Water out of back when we had goats in Ohio, and I got some Swill Water right up, and I drank it, and sure enough, I mean, that's putting your money where your mouth is, but to those practical things, you absolutely have to, you can't just, it's not enough just to even own it. You got to be able to use it. You got to know what you're doing with it.
It does no good to sit on the shelf. You got to use it and make it work and know that it works. And all of these different ways of making fire. Can you start a fire with a flint and steel? Well, it's not a flint and steel, but it's a ferro rod and same difference. And have you ever done it? Well, we had in our CQ group, we had a camp out, and we had the Preparedness Olympics. And we had everybody, you have 60 seconds to get a flame going. Go. And I tell you what, most of them did. And they were just using a ferro rod. They could not use a lighter or matches. They had to do it some other way. And most of them used a ferro rod and had a flame going in 60 seconds.
Wow.
Pretty good.
Well, Tyler Woods, thank you so much for this time, this interview. I've personally learned a lot. And I'm indebted to you. I'm indebted for your book, the knowledge that I'm getting out of it. 11th Hour Preparedness. There will be a link down below for you guys to pick one up if you're interested in grabbing a copy. I would highly recommend it. And with that, I just want to say thank you, man. So really appreciate your time today.
Hey, thanks. It's been a lot of fun.
All right. Well, you guys have an amazing day. Don't forget, grab a copy down below. Tyler Woods. See you guys.